topics that faculty members work on by kind of just going through our different faculty members and what some of the research questions are that they're interested in. And then I'll let, as we come upon the faculty members who are here in the Zoom room with us, I'll let them speak a little bit more to give an example of something that they're working on with students. And feel free, if you do have questions anywhere along the way, just feel free to ask your questions and I will answer them as I can. All right. So Dr. Fernandez is the first one on my slides here. So since she's here, I'll let her go ahead and just say a little bit about what she works on.
Thanks. So in case you're wondering what behavioral neuroscience or biopsychology, sometimes we're called that, I look at the biological basis of mental processes such as emotions, cognitions, etc., and behavior. So I'm looking at how your brain and your spinal cord, your central nervous system and peripheral nervous system all allow us to essentially sit here, listen to me talking, and allows me to talk to you and wave my hands like a person. My specific region or area of research looks at the effects of adolescent alcohol and nicotine exposure on the developing brain. So our brain is still developing until we're our mid to late 20s. And so I'm really interested in what happens when during that developmental adolescent time period, we engage in just normal, not normal, drug-seeking behavior such as alcohol and nicotine. Typically, those are the drugs that are used during the teen and adolescent time period. And so I want to see what those long-term effects are of that early drug exposure. And I use an animal model. I use rodents for ethical reasons. I can't just randomly pick people and give them alcohol and nicotine. It's not ethical. And I'm not trying to make a joke. And yeah, and so the person that you're seeing right now on the screen, their name is Vera, and they were a summer student that worked with me last summer, and she looked at the effects of nicotine during adolescence on later anxiety-like behavior. So I'm really interested in research, and we all love science. So definitely come to St. Mary's, it's pretty cool.
And we have a really good neuroscience program that our behavioral neuroscience faculty participate in. So if you have an interest in the more neuroscience area, we do a lot of collaboration and sharing of courses between psychology and neuroscience. We do have two other behavioral neuroscientists on the faculty. Dr. Dennis also looks at different things related to addiction and specifically sex differences in addiction. And this is a picture of him with one of his summer undergraduate research fellowship students from one of the past summers. So he's also doing research in that area. And Dr. Bailey is also a researcher that looks at animal models of depression in particular. And so she looks at depression and learning and memory and how research can be used to better understand those mechanisms. And this is a picture of her with several of her students at the Eastern Psychological Association meeting. And so if you have questions about what Dr. Dennis or Dr. Bailey do, I'm sure that Dr. Fernandez can talk a little bit more about their research as well when we get to the end. In terms of our social psychologists, all three of the social psychologists in the department are here on the call. So I am one of those. Dr. Friedman and Dr. Howansky are the others. Basically, my research looks at media influences and how media can influence different types of attitudes and behaviors, specifically in the realm of health behaviors. I also am interested in sort of new technologies. So I've done research on social media. The picture on my slide is one of my students working on a virtual reality study that I've run a series of different studies looking at the effects of virtual reality on learning. And I also am affiliated with the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program. So I often mentor psychology projects that have a focus on women and gender. I looked for a picture of some of Dr. Friedman's game work, and I couldn't find one of those easily. I'll have to get one from her, but I'll let her speak a little bit about her research.
Yes, I really do need to take more pictures. So I have two main lines of research. One is on social rejection and trying to understand how people do it, why they do it. Are there better ways? Are there worse ways? Right now, I'm doing a series of studies on ghosting and trying to understand how that works and whether people like it when you ghost them. The answer is no. And so why people do it, and are there ways we could do this in a less hurtful manner? I also look at gender biases in rejection, but also gender biases against women in STEM in particular. And my second line of research looks at how we can create interventions, often game-based interventions, that can combat biases against women in STEM and can increase the retention of women in STEM. So making, I have collaborators with whom I make digital and non-digital games that try to change the way people think about women scientists. And so I work with students on both of these different projects, trying to change the way we interact with other people.
Our third social psychologist is Dr. Hawansky.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Hawansky. Most of my research deals in visual biases. So namely, how do the different ways that we see other people or see ourselves affect big outcomes? So for example, how do we see the faces of people who identify as transgender, and what are the impacts of that? I also not just deal with perception, but I also look at visual attention. So I see Dr. Tickle has a picture of an eye tracking device on here. So if you're interested, you can come on over to St. Mary's and you can work with me on our awesome eye tracker. So our eye tracking computer just looks like a regular computer, but what it's doing is actually tracking where people's eyes are moving while they're looking at a face or a body or working on a task. So we can see where people are looking, where they're not looking, what their pupils are doing while they're looking. It's basically mind reading, which is really, really cool. And again, all of these trying to predict big social outcomes. So things like discrimination, prejudice, healthy behaviors, climate change beliefs. I also do some work on cognitive biases as well. So how do we think about people who fall under different social groups? So one of my directed research students and I were planning on going to Denver this summer to present a talk on stereotypes about transgender women of color. However, we are not going to Denver, but she and I will be presenting that talk remotely. So it's been a really nice opportunity to bring one of my directed research students into a conference. So happy to talk more about that stuff if anyone has questions later.
Great, thanks. We do have several psychologists in the counseling area. Dr. Williams is one of them, and some of the work that she does has to do with sort of what happens within counseling sessions and how different practitioners can utilize different strategies to meet the needs of diverse groups. So she has a particular interest in feminist-based counseling, and also how how counseling can be used to facilitate leadership and career development over time. So those are some of the things that she works on. And Dr. Kisler is one of our other counseling psychologists, and I'll let her speak.
Hi there. So again, my name is Dr. Kisler, and I forgot to mention during the intros that I'm also an alum from St. Mary's College. So I've been working here as a faculty member for a few years now, but I actually did directed research with Dr. Tickle and completed my St. Mary's project with Dr. Williams, who you saw on the previous slide. So in general, within counseling psychology, most of the research is either on psychotherapy, how that process works, what kinds of therapy techniques are more effective than others. And that's primarily Dr. Williams' focus. And then the other area of research is on how do different mental health outcomes actually come to be. And some of that is within the realm of multicultural psychology, which is my area of focus. So within my research, I focus on experience of oppression like ethnic discrimination and sexism, and how that might lead to mental health outcomes. I'm especially interested in ethnic and sexual minorities. I also do a little bit of research on social justice and how we can do research in a way that is more socially just to begin with. And then finally, some of my research has also been on improving mental health services for marginalized communities. So for example, one of my St. Mary's project students a couple of years ago interviewed clinicians who were using music, hip hop therapy as a means of serving clients who were Latino and African American. and especially young men in that population. And I guess I would also add that most of my research takes place online or at least remotely. So that would be a lot of internet surveys that I utilize, and I also use a lot of interviews. So a lot of my research is actually qualitative research, meaning that we use systematic ways of looking at language and that kind of verbal data as opposed to numerical data, even though although I do use that as well.
And I'll just, I'll follow up on that point because I didn't mention this earlier, but we do have capabilities at St. Mary's to conduct online research. We also do a lot, do interview research, and we have services related to transcription and things that we have access to and that students can use. We also have a number of lab spaces in the building for use in different types of research, small spaces, large group spaces, spaces that have one-way mirrors in them, spaces that have video recording capability, spaces with specialized equipment related to perception, like virtual reality, eye tracking. We have rooms where people can model counseling types of interactions and be observed and watch those. We have the animal laboratories. So we have a lot of different research spaces available that students do have access to for working on both their senior thesis, their SMPs, as well as research that they do with faculty members. So we have a number of facilities that make it available for us to do that. And we do have a research requirement in our Intro to Psychology class, and we give extra credit for research participation in other classes. So there's always lots of students around to participate in the research studies that we have that use human subjects. We do have two cognitive psychologists, neither of whom could be here today, but Dr. Platt focuses on sort of critical thinking and how people do critical thinking and when critical thinking fails, including sort of looking at conspiracy theories and why people believe them and what leads people to have beliefs in conspiracy theories. And Dr. Mantell focuses a lot of his research on the perception side of cognition. His area of specialty is in music perception, but he also does more general perception work in terms of vision and language. But his area that he works mostly with students on, you can see his poster, Influence of Tonal Pitch, was a poster that he had with some of his students, looks at the perception of sound. And then last but not least, certainly we have developmental psychologists. So Dr. Mirabile, who's pictured in this picture actually in one of his classrooms, not in his research, on a day when they bring children in to explore different types of developmental tasks. He does research looking at social and emotional adjustment and how parents and teachers and other adult figures can help socialize positive emotional experiences with children. And so some of the research that he does involves collaboration with local schools, brings in community members' children to participate in research, things of that nature. Oh, and I'm missing one slide there that must be in my deck, but not in yours. Dr. Jensen is also a developmental psychologist whose research focuses on sort of adolescent social adjustment over time and the different factors that contribute to that. So I may be able to pop out and pull up her slide in a moment, but basically, these are some of the areas where we're doing research. When students get involved in research, regardless of which area this is, they do get involved from sort of start to finish on the projects. They get involved at the hypothesis generation stage in some cases. They may actually do data or research design work and trying to help develop questionnaires or surveys or interview protocols. They may assist with data collection in terms of being the people in the lab running the studies and collecting the data. They may be involved in coding of the data, especially with some of our interview-based research designs. And then in the finalization of the data, data analysis, data presentation, things of that nature. So we do try to give the full experience to our students. So if you're interested in getting involved in research at St. Mary's, there's lots of ways to do that and lots of different opportunities across the realm of psychology to be able to do that. So for now, I'll just open it up for people if anyone has any questions or if any of the faculty have any follow-up comments about things that I didn't mention, just to give you a little bit of opportunity to ask questions. You can ask questions of any one of us in general, or you can pose general questions as well. And I'm monitoring the chat, so you can type them in if you don't have great audio, or you can just unmute your speaker whenever you'd like to ask a question. And if there aren't questions about research as well, I'm happy all of us can answer other questions about classes or curriculum and things as well. Anyone have any questions? Any faculty want to weigh in with any other comments or information? Or if there's anyone that you want to hear more about, if any of the students want to hear more about what some of us are doing, we can also follow up with more specific feedback as well.
So it looks like there's a question about how you get involved with summer research.
Yeah, so maybe one of you who has had a SURF student can speak to that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question. So there's at least 2 ways that I know that students have gotten involved in research in my lab over the summer. Local students have been able to sign up for directed research, in which you engage in research in the lab and get class credit for it. So they can, that's one way in which students can do summer research. And then the additional method is something Dr. Tickle mentioned earlier in their presentation. We call it the SURF project, the St. Mary's Undergraduate Research Fellowship, or Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship, both work. And in that, you reach out to an advisor, a mentor, and you develop a research proposal. So you think of a question, a research question that you're really interested in answering, and together the 2 of you figure out a way to answer that question within the confines of a month or a month and a half, which is how long the program lasts. And it's really great because it's a small cohort of students from anywhere from 8 to 10. You are given a stipend, and you're also given free housing. Well, it's not happening right now, but when everything is non-pandemic, you live on campus over the summer, and you're also given a meal plan. And so you don't have to worry about anything except the research, right? And it's really, really exciting. And so generally, the way that I've done those SURF projects is I've reached out to students that seem interested. And once I had a student reach out to me as well. So.
I did find my missing slide. So here's Dr. Jensen. Social development across childhood and adolescence, and particularly with development across non-majority groups, so marginalized groups. So sorry, that one was hidden when I went through the first time. Can you combine developmental and counseling psychology? So yes, the way that the psych curriculum is set up is that you're going to get broad exposure to multiple areas of psychology. So we have requirements that mean that you need to take some courses in counseling and a little bit in social or cognitive or development. You can't entirely just track yourself in one area, because we want to make sure you have good breadth across the major. And then you are able to specialize more when you get to the upper division courses and the laboratory courses in the areas that are most of interest to you. So if you were interested in developmental and counseling, you could certainly focus, you would be taking the lifespan development course at the 200 level, and probably the counseling psych course at the 200 level. And those would be prerequisites where you could take both of those as your lab courses. So you could get exposure to both of them in a laboratory setting. And then if you were interested in pursuing something that combined them both in your St. Mary's project, then you could certainly do that. You'd probably be working with a faculty member who's either in developmental or in counseling, but they could certainly mentor a project that crosses those areas pretty easily. So certainly, even though I'm talking about them as being these separate areas, many of us have research interests that overlap across at least some aspects of the different areas. And so it's certainly possible to look at, to not be focused within one of them as you progress through the major. And we would encourage you to sort of, to pursue multiple different sub areas within psychology, because they use different methods, they have different focuses in terms of the content and the populations that they study. And so it's valuable to have exposure to more than one. Caitlin, was there anything else that you think from an admissions perspective we should have mentioned?
I am curious about where our prospective students are from. If you all want to type it in, if you don't want to chat, whichever way, it's fine.
Okay, Marylanders.
Frederick, Maryland happens to be my territory, and I am also a local, so I can appreciate that. Well, welcome. And did you all get a chance to come down to campus to visit yet? Good, cool, awesome.
It's good if you were able to do that before everything closed down. I hope you're finishing up in your respective places without too much difficulty. We're hopeful that we'll be back to normal for the fall. We'll keep you posted.
For those of you that mentioned that you're interested in developmental or social, what aspects of that, what's interesting about developmental or social? Why are you attracted to those regions or research areas?
All right. Any other questions or anything like that? I think it might be a good point to wrap this up and definitely come back to see a little bit more about the psychology major at St. Mary's College, as this was mostly about research and research opportunities, which were really exciting. But we would definitely love you all to participate in other sessions that we have going to, so you can meet students and other faculty as well. All right, thanks for joining us.
And if you have any other questions, feel free to send me an email. My name again is Jennifer Tickle, so it's jjtickle@smcm.edu, and I'd be happy to answer questions that you have about the major or about classes for the fall or anything else that you might need. And thanks to our faculty members for joining me today, and Angie too.
Thank you guys.
It's nice meeting you all.